Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. Something like 130 warships, a floating fortress, really.
Yeah, massive. Armed with what, 2,500 cannons?
Exactly. And carrying 30,000 troops. We're talking about the Spanish Armada, 1588.
An absolutely colossal effort by Philip II of Spain.
It really is hard to grasp that scale today, isn't it?
It is. And in this deep dive, we're looking at exactly why this huge fleet was sent against England back then.
Right. We want to trace the events of that year, 1588.
And explore the consequences, which were pretty significant. The sources we looked at give a really sharp focus on it all.
Yeah, they do. So our mission, if you like, is to figure out why Spain, this is a global superpower at the time.
A huge power in the late 1500s.
Why they'd launched such a massive force against England. There were lots of reasons bubbling away. Right?
Oh, absolutely. You had the deep religious divide, for starters. Protestant England versus Catholic Spain.
And then England was, shall we say, actively helping rebels in the Netherlands. Rebels fighting Spanish rule.
Definitely. And raiding Spanish treasure ships, too. That wasn't exactly helpful from Philip's point of view.
No, I bet not. It hit them economically and strategically.
It really did. And we can't forget the personal angle either.
You mean Mary, Queen of Scots?
Exactly. Philip was reportedly furious when Elizabeth I executed Mary, who was Catholic, in 1587.
Ah, okay. So that really fanned the flames.
Mm-hmm.
A personal grudge on top of everything else.
It certainly seemed to provide a powerful justification, maybe a rallying cry.
So Philip gets this enormous fleet together. What was the actual game plan? How were they supposed to conquer England?
Well, it was basically a three-step strategy, quite carefully planned, on paper at least.
Okay, step one.
Assemble the Armada, which they did about 130 ships, as we said.
Step two.
Sail to the Netherlands.
The Netherlands. Why there? Seems a bit out of the way.
Well, that's where a large, experienced Spanish army was based, really seasoned troops.
Ah, okay. So pick up the army.
Precisely. The Armada sails into the channel, meets up with these soldiers, ferries them across.
And step three, invade England with this combined force.
That was the plan. Land and sea power working together.
Okay, so let's track the events of 1588. It didn't exactly go smoothly from the start, did it?
No, not at all. Their very first attempt to leave Lisbon.
Which was to head towards the Netherlands, right? To get the troops.
Correct. That first attempt ran straight into terrible weather, storms.
So they had to turn back.
Yep. Forced back to port, needing repairs. It was maybe a bad omen. It certainly foreshadowed the problems they'd face.
Right. So eventually they regroup, repair, and set sail again from Spain.
They do. And then comes that moment. They're spotted off the coast of Plymouth.
And that's when the fighting really starts.
That's the trigger. The English knew they were coming, and the fleet mobilized. Sir Francis Drake leading the charge.
So the first attacks happened in the English Channel.
That's right. But the Spanish had this specific defensive formation.
The crescent shape. I remember reading about that.
Yes, exactly. Like a big crescent moon. The strongest warships on the outside, protecting the weaker transport ships inside.
Clever. How effective was it?
Initially, quite effective. It was a solid defensive posture, maybe a bit traditional, less flexible than the English, perhaps.
But it worked at first.
It did. It kept the English ships from getting close enough to do real damage with their cannons.
So Drake couldn't break through.
Not in those first encounters. He actually had to pull back. It showed the Spanish were well prepared, tactically strong at the outset.
Okay, so despite those initial skirmishes, the Armada keeps going. Where did they head next?
They continued up the channel and eventually anchored near Calais on the French coast.
Calais.
Yeah.
Right across from England. Very close. If you're picturing a map, it's just that narrow bit of sea there.
Exactly. A crucial spot. They were basically waiting there to link up with the army coming from the Netherlands.
But the English weren't just going to let them sit there, I assume.
No way. The English weren't going to let them regroup or get those troops aboard.
And this is where we get the famous fire ships. Tell us about Drake's next move at Calais.
Right. This is a game changer. It's really quite ingenious and pretty bold.
What do they do?
Instead of another direct attack, Drake used fire ships. These were basically old, disposable ships.
Not their main warships.
No. Stuff they didn't mind losing. They loaded them with flammable material, set them on fire.
And just sent them drifting towards the Spanish fleet.
Under the cover of night, carried by the wind and tide, right into the anchored Armada.
Wow. You can just imagine the panic, burning ships heading straight for you.
Absolute chaos, utter pandemonium. The The Spanish captains were terrified these burning hulks would set their own ships ablaze.
So what could they do?
The only thing they could do in that moment, cut their anchor cables and scatter, get out of the way, fast.
And that broke their formation, that strong crescent.
Completely shattered it. They were all dispersed, disorganized, which left them incredibly vulnerable.
And that led directly to
The Battle of Gravelines.
Gravlines. Okay, that sounds decisive. What happened there?
Well, with the Spanish fleet scattered, the English could finally engage them more effectively, on their terms.
How so? What advantage did the English have now?
The English ships, galleons, were generally a bit faster, more maneuverable.
And their cannons.
They often had longer range guns, so they could stand off and pound the bigger, less agile Spanish ships without getting too close.
Inflicting serious damage.
Significant damage, yes. The English definitely got the upper hand at Gravelines.
So the plan to meet the army was totally wrecked. They'd taken losses. What now for the Armada?
Retreat was really the only option left, but they couldn't go back the way they came.
Why not?
The English fleet still pretty much controlled the channel. Too risky.
So where could they go?
North. They were forced to sail north, up into the North Sea, aiming to go around Scotland and Ireland to get back to Spain.
That sounds like a long, dangerous route. If you look on a map, that's a huge detour.
Extremely hazardous. And then, as if the English Navy wasn't enough,
The weather turned nasty again. I remember reading it got really bad.
brutal. As the already battered Spanish ships tried to navigate around the top of Scotland and down past Ireland,
Yeah.
they sailed straight into ferocious storms. Just relentless, terrible weather.
They're wrecking ships.
Lots of them. Smashed onto the rocky coasts, huge numbers of sailors lost, drowned or wrecked ashore.
So the weather might have done more damage than the actual fighting.
Quite possibly. The impact of the storms was devastating. It finished off many of the ships that had survived Gravelines.
What a terrible end to the campaign. So this once mighty fleet, they finally made it back to Spain, or what was left of them.
Eventually, yes. A depleted fleet limped back into Spanish ports.
How much smaller?
Significantly. Far fewer ships, thousands fewer men. Just a shadow of the force that had set out.
And meanwhile, back in England, celebration.
Oh, absolutely. Huge relief, widespread rejoicing across the country.
A massive national victory.
Definitely. Queen Elizabeth even commissioned a famous painting, the Armada portrait, to commemorate it. Shows how important it was symbolically.
So beyond the immediate relief and celebration, what were the big long-term consequences of this failure for Spain and success for England?
They were really profound. Firstly, and maybe most importantly for England, it secured its future as a Protestant nation.
Right. The threat of a Catholic takeover backed by Spain was gone.
Effectively neutralized, yes. And the monarch remained head of the Church of England.
And secondly,
It really marked Britain's emergence, or maybe accelerated its rise, as a major sea power.
they'd faced down the biggest navy in the world and won.
Exactly. It boosted their confidence, their maritime capability, and for Spain, well, it wasn't the end of their empire overnight, of course not.
But it was a blow.
A huge blow to their prestige, their aura of invincibility. It certainly marked the beginning of a gradual decline from that peak of global power status.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the main points for everyone listening. The Armada sailed because of religion, politics,
English support for rebels, raiding treasure fleets.
and that personal anger from Philip over Mary Queen of Scots.
Yep. Then the key moments in the campaign itself
The fire ships at Calais, total game changer.
led to the Battle of Gravelines, where the English gained the advantage,
And finally, that disastrous journey home through terrible storms.
which wrecked much of what was left.
And the result. England stays Protestant, grows as a naval power. Spain's dominance starts to slowly fade.
That sums up the main takeaways really well.
So as we finish up this deep dive, here's something to think about. We've talked tactics, we've talked weather, both clearly crucial.
Definitely.
But maybe think bigger picture for a second. Beyond the ships and storms, were there maybe deeper societal thing or cultural factors?
Like what?
Well, things within English society itself that helped them punch above their weight, so to speak, against this massive Spanish Empire. What underlying strengths might have played a part?
That's a really interesting question. What made them so resilient, perhaps, beyond just the military side? Something to chew on.
Exactly, something to mull over.
Yeah.
And just finally, for anyone wanting a more visual look, the sources did mention summary videos being available.
Right, so that could be another way to explore this if you're interested. A really pivotal moment in history.